When a black man in jeans and a hoodie walks into an upscale retail store, the staff ignores him, especially one smug employee who flat out refuses to help. What no one knows is that he's not just a customer. He's the CEO, and this surprise visit is about to shake everything. Julian Alexander wasn't the kind of CEO people expected to see walking down Main Street in sneakers, jeans, and a plain hoodie. At 38, he was one of the youngest black executives to lead a national retail chain, and yet if you passed him on the street, you'd think he was just another tech guy, maybe an artist, or a startup founder still hustling his way toward some dream. That's how he preferred it. The power, the suits, the corner offices with skyline views, they were part of his world, sure. But when Julian wanted to know the truth about his business, he didn't read reports or watch sales trends. He walked among his people, silently, secretly, and watched. Today, he chose a store in the affluent suburbs of Brookhaven, a newly opened location of Urban Luxe, his brainchild, his company, his pride. It was a retail haven that blended streetwear with high fashion, built on the belief that diversity, inclusion, and empowerment could also be profitable. But from the moment Julian walked through the glass doors, he could feel it. Something was off. It started with the way the girl at the front counter glanced at him briefly, dismissively, as if he'd wandered into the wrong store. She didn't greet him, didn't smile, didn't offer a welcome. Just a flicker of her eyes over his outfit and a slight sneer, before turning back to her phone. Julian smiled slightly to himself. He'd seen it before. Assumptions, biases, gatekeeping, and though he was used to it outside his company's walls, it stung a little more now. These were his employees. This was his store. He nodded politely at the woman, whose name tag read Lindsay, and continued into the boutique. Polished marble floors, elegant shelving, and tastefully curated mannequins dressed in the latest drops surrounded him. Everything looked perfect, but presentation was just one part of the brand. Culture was the rest. He watched a young white couple get ushered toward the back by another staff member, smiling and laughing as she pointed out limited edition jackets. Two young black boys walked in moments later, barely got a nod before they were left to fend for themselves. And then there was him, a black man alone, unshaven, casually dressed, carrying no visible signs of wealth or status. Invisible. Julian drifted toward the new display near the center of the store, admiring the detail of a bomber jacket he'd personally greenlit for production, a handcrafted collaboration with a Harlem artist. He picked it up, ran his fingers along the stitching, but before he could take a closer look, he heard the voice. "Excuse me, sir, that's a limited piece. If you're not buying, I'd prefer you didn't handle it too much." Julian turned slowly. The speaker was a young man, mid-20s, tall, dressed sharply in Urban Luxe attire from head to toe. His namatag read Brad. His tone was clipped, condescending. Julian studied him for a moment, waiting for some recognition, some flicker of respect. Nothing, just thinly veiled suspicion. "I was just admiring the craftsmanship," Julian replied, his voice calm, even. "I'm familiar with the line." Brad raised an eyebrow. "Right, look, we don't really allow people to loiter in here. If you're just browsing, I'd suggest heading to the clearance section. That's more your lane." The insult hit with precision. Julian blinked. He glanced down at himself. Plain hoodie, sneakers, no designer labels, no gold watches. He looked like what they assumed, someone who didn't belong. The irony would have been hilarious if it weren't so painful. Urban Luxe was built to dismantle this exact kind of elitism, but here it was, alive and well, thriving in a store bearing his name. Julian wanted to snap back, to reveal himself then and there, but he didn't. Not yet. He nodded again, stepping back from the jacket. "Thanks for the suggestion," he said coolly, his eyes locked on Brad's. Brad, clearly feeling triumphant, turned and strutted back toward the cash wrap. "Another one trying to stunt?" he muttered under his breath, loud enough for Julian to hear. The words echoed in Julian's ears like a dare. But still, he stayed silent. For now, he wandered through the store, noting how differently each customer was treated. The well-dressed received warm welcomes and tailored advice. Those who didn't fit the mold, mostly people of color, were ignored or subtly steered away. It wasn't just bad service, it was systemic. Coded behavior that eroded the very values Urban Luxe claimed to stand for. Julian reached for his phone and typed a quick note. Brookhaven store evaluate customer service behavior. Hidden bias evident. He considered alerting his executive team but decided against it for the moment. This needed to be seen firsthand, documented, confronted the right way. He continued his walk around the store, casually engaging with other employees. A few were polite but indifferent. No one recognized him. That was expected. He didn't often show up in store, and when he did, it was in a suit with PR photos snapping away. Today was different. Today was truth. As he made his way toward the fitting rooms, he overheard a conversation between Brad and Lindsay. "He's still here? Man, some people just don't get it. This isn't goodwill." Lindsay chuckled. "Right. He asked me where the water was. I told him, this ain't a community center." Julian's stomach twisted, not with anger, but with a deep, disappointed ache. Not only were these two employees rude, they were comfortable being cruel, comfortable mocking customers in a store that was supposed to represent inclusion and aspiration. He waited by the fitting room wall, where a young Latina employee named Camila was folding clothes. She looked up and smiled warmly, genuinely. "Hey there, need any help finding something today?" Julian smiled back. "Actually, yeah, I'm looking for a gift. Something bold. Something that speaks to culture and identity." Camila's eyes lit up. "Ooh, I've got just the thing. We just got in some pieces from the Heritage series. Let me show you." She led him to the back wall, explaining each design, the artists behind them, the inspiration. Her passion was evident, her kindness effortless. Julian listened, nodding, taking mental notes. She gets it, he thought, not just the products, but the purpose. They walked back toward the register, where Brad was now leaning on the counter, checking his reflection in a display screen. Camila waved him over. "Brad, can you ring this gentleman up for me?" Brad looked up, clearly annoyed. "Seriously? We're doing charity cases now," he muttered. Julian had had enough. He stepped forward and calmly reached into his back pocket, pulling out a slim leather wallet. From it, he slid out a platinum business card and handed it to Camila. She read it, eyes widening. Then she looked at him again, as if seeing him for the first time. "Julia Alexander," she read aloud. "Founder and CEO. Urban Lux." Brad blinked. The smirk slid off his face like melted wax. Lindsay, who'd overheard, dropped her phone. Silence fell over the store like a curtain. Julian's face remained neutral, unreadable. "Surprised?" he asked softly. Brad stammered, trying to form words. Julian turned to Camila. "Thank you for being the only one in this store who treated me like a human being." Then, to the others, "As for the rest of you, we'll talk soon, very soon." He turned and walked out, not waiting for their apologies, not needing them. The store was silent behind him. Outside, the sun was setting, casting a golden hue on the parking lot. Julian took a deep breath, his mind already racing with ideas for the next morning's executive meeting. Change wasn't coming, it was already here. The next morning, the Brookhaven store opened just like any other day, but the air inside buzzed with uneasy energy. Rumors had spread overnight like wildfire. Texts had flown between employees, whispers had turned to frantic speculation, and Brad had barely slept. He kept replaying the moment in his mind. The hoodie-clad man he dismissed like trash turning out to be Julian Alexander, the CEO of the entire Urban Lux brand. It didn't compute. How could that guy be the founder? He didn't look like success. He didn't act like corporate royalty. But the business card was real. And now Brad was sweating bullets behind the cash register, shooting nervous glances at every customer who walked in. Lindsay was no better. Her smile was forced, her phone shoved deep into her pocket for once. Camila had said little since arriving, but her silence was loud with disappointment. She had known, even before the card was revealed, that Julian was someone. His presence, his composure, it all made sense in hindsight. And now, she was quietly waiting to see what would happen next. None of them knew that upstairs, above their heads in the store's executive meeting room, a storm was already forming. Julian arrived early, dressed sharply in a tailored navy suit, crisp white shirt, and understated gold cufflinks. Look. Far from yesterday's hoodie and sneakers, he sat at the head of the polished oak table, surrounded by regional managers, the store director, and his trusted VP of operations, Dana Monroe, a Nona-sense former retail exec who knew how to clean house when needed. Julian didn't start the meeting with a slideshow or corporate jargon. Instead, he opened his iPad, tapped to a recording security footage from the previous day on hit play. The room watched in silence as Brad dismissed him, as Lindsay mocked him, as customers were visibly profiled and ignored. Julian let it play without commentary, the video damning in its simplicity. When it ended, he leaned forward and rested his hands on the table. "This," he said quietly, "is not who we are." No one spoke. The store director, a nervous man named Greg Walters, wiped sweat from his brow. "Mr. Alexander," he stammered. I didn't know this was happening. I assure you this doesn't reflect our training or values." Julian's eyes narrowed slightly. "Then your training is broken, or your hiring practices are..." He turned to Dana. "How many complaints has this location received in the last 2 months?" Dana, ever prepared, opened a folder, 9-5 verbal, 4 written, 3 about Brad, 2 about Lindsay, all flagged as resolved with no follow-up documentation. Julian's jaw tightened. So either the complaints were ignored, or someone buried them. A heavy silence followed. Greg shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "I take full responsibility," he said weakly. "I'll issue a retraining memo immediately." But Julian shook his head. "Retraining doesn't fix character." He tapped his iPad again. "We built Urban Lux to elevate communities that have long been excluded from spaces like this. Our brand isn't just clothes, it's culture, empowerment, access. If our employees don't understand that, they don't belong here." He stood, commanding the room with quiet authority. "I want both Brad and Lindsay suspended effective immediately, pending review. Termination is likely." Every complaint they touched needs to be and I want a full audit of all store locations for similar behavior secret shopper programs, anonymous feedback channels, the works. Dana nodded, already scribbling notes. Understood. I'll deploy teams by end of week. Julian looked. Around the room, we're not just fixing the store. We're cleansing our culture, because if we tolerate this at one level, we've failed at all levels. Meanwhile, downstairs, the tension among the employees had reached a fever pitch. Brad tried to act unfazed, cracking jokes and fidgeting with the display racks, but no one was laughing. Camila kept to herself, quietly helping a mother and her teenage son choose outfits for a school event. The boy, a shy kid in thick glasses, lit up as Camila showed him a bold bomber jacket and encouraged him to try it on. "You look sharp," she said genuinely, and the boy beamed. Julian noticed it all as he descended from the meeting room. He watched the interaction, his heart softening slightly. This was the spirit of Urban Nooks. He approached quietly and placed a hand on Camila's shoulder. She turned and smiled, slightly surprised. "Camila," he said warmly, "you have no idea how important your kindness was yesterday." She blushed. "Thank you, sir. I was just doing my job." Julian smiled back. "Then I want more people doing your kind of job." He turned to the boy and his mother. "How's the fit?" The boy looked up, stunned to see the CEO in front of him. "It's amazing," he stammered. "You designed this?" Julian chuckled. "I approved it. One of my favorite pieces. You wear it well." The boy grinned like he'd just won the lottery. Back at the front of the store, Brad's world was crashing down. Dana had arrived with 2 HR representatives in tow. "Brad Thomas," she said coolly, "you're being placed on immediate suspension pending an internal investigation." Brad blinked. "Wait, what? You can't do this. I've worked here for over a year." Dana raised an eyebrow. "And in that year, we've received multiple complaints about your treatment of customers. The CEO himself witnessed it firsthand. Consider yourself lucky it's not an immediate termination." Brad looked around for support. Lindsay was nowhere to be seen, already escorted out by HR 10 minutes prior. Camila avoided his eyes. Julian stood nearby, watching it all unfold, with a calm, unreadable expression. Brad tried one last time. "Mr. Alexander, I didn't know it was you," but Julian held up a hand. "That's exactly the problem. You shouldn't have to know who someone is to treat them with basic decency." Brad's face flushed red as he was led out of the store, his future unraveling behind him. The rest of the staff stood frozen. Julian turned to them. "I'm not here to scare you. I'm here because this store represents more than revenue. It represents me. It represents us. And if we don't protect our culture, we lose everything." He paused. "If you're here to uplift people, to celebrate diversity, to serve with passion and purpose, you have a home here. If not, this might not be the right place for you." The message was clear, and it landed like a thunderclap. That afternoon, Julian held an open-floor discussion with the team. Camila spoke first. She talked about her upbringing, about how Urban Luxe was the first place she ever felt her culture was seen in fashion. Others followed. A black sales associate named Deshaun admitted he'd considered quitting after being repeatedly ignored by management when he suggested adding local artists to the display lineup. A Filipino stylist shared how he'd often been asked to tone down the cultural flair in his work. Julian took notes on everything. These stories weren't exceptions, they were patterns. And he was done allowing them to go unnoticed. Later that evening, back at HQ, Julian convened his senior leadership team for an emergency brand summit. The mood was serious. The CEO laid it out plainly. "We've drifted," he said. "We built this company to reflect communities that have always been left out of the mainstream, but success made us comfortable, complacent. Somewhere along the way, we let our values become decoration instead of foundation. That ends now." He unveiled a new internal campaign, Real Roots, a company-wide re-education and accountability program aimed at returning to the core mission of Urban. It included bias training, cultural competency workshops, quarterly evaluations based on inclusivity metrics, and a revamped leadership development track specifically for underrepresented employees. "Our stores will become safe spaces again," Julian declared, "not just for customers but for staff. And anyone who stands in the way of that will not stand long in this company." Applause followed, not forced, but genuine. His passion was contagious. Across social media, word of the CEO's undercover visit began to leak. A customer who'd been in the Brookhaven store that day tweeted about seeing some guy in a hoodie get profiled by a snobby staff member. Turns out, it was the CEO, and he fired the dude on the spot. The tweet went viral. Soon, articles appeared. Urban Luxe CEO goes undercover, uncovers discrimination. Julian Alexander, the CEO who walked among us. The public reaction was electric. Longtime customers applauded him. New ones flocked to the brand. But Julian didn't care about the clout. He cared about the cause. And as he sat alone in his office that night, overlooking the city skyline, he thought about his own journey, about being the kid no one believed in, the entrepreneur laughed out of boardrooms, the black man told to tone it down. He'd come too far to watch his legacy get twisted by arrogance and ignorance. Change wasn't just coming, it had arrived, wrapped not in gold or silk, but in accountability. And this was only the beginning. The momentum Julian Alexander had sparked didn't just ripple through the walls of the Brookhaven store, it roared across the entire Urban Luxe empire like a tidal wave. Within 72 hours of his undercover visit and the swift firings that followed, every regional manager, store director, and department lead received an urgent company-wide message. Urban Luxe was undergoing a full cultural reawakening, and every person wearing its name tag had a choice: evolve with it or be left behind. The Real Roots initiative, announced with force and clarity, wasn't a PR stunt. It was a reclamation. Every store was required to hold mandatory listening sessions, conduct cultural humility workshops, and implement customer feedback loops within 2 weeks. Julian personally led the first town hall, live-streamed from the Brooklyn flagship store where Urban Luxe had first made its name, standing in front of a packed crowd of employees, journalists, customers, and local artists. He didn't mince words. "We are not in the business of just selling clothes," he said, pacing the floor in a fresh navy-angled Urban Luxe varsity jacket designed by a black designer from Detroit. "We're here to tell stories, to reflect truths, to build bridges. If all we offer is fashion without empathy, then we are no better than the brands we once stood against." The crowd erupted in applause, but Julian wasn't done. "This brand exists because I walked into stores where I was ignored, underestimated, or followed, and I swore never here. If we lose that promise, we lose everything." That speech became the pulse of a company reborn. Across the country, stores began to transform not physically, but spiritually. Camila, now promoted to assistant store manager at Brookhaven, led her team in bi-weekly reflection meetings where every employee, from part-time floor staff to store leaders, shared insights about bias, culture, and inclusion. Under her leadership, customer satisfaction soared, and word of mouth brought in a new, loyal community base that hadn't previously felt welcome in the boutique-style space. Urban Luxe stores in cities like Chicago, Oakland, Atlanta, and Houston followed suit, appointing diversity champions from within their own staff to ensure that every location reflected the people it claimed to serve. Julian made unannounced visits to 5 more stores this time, not in disguise, but also not flanked by assistants or cameras. He watched, he listened, and he engaged, talking to employees one-on-one and asking hard questions. "Do you feel seen here? Can you speak up without fear? What would you change if you were in charge?" One 19-year-old intern in the DC store nervously admitted she'd never felt empowered to speak to leadership before Julian's visit. "I thought the suits upstairs didn't care," she confessed. "But when I saw what happened in Brookhaven, I realized maybe we matter." Julian smiled. "You do," he said, "and I want to hear from you directly. Here's my email. Don't let anyone tell you silence is safer." But change wasn't embraced by everyone. In some stores, resistance bubbled beneath the surface. A few long-standing managers bristled at the shift in expectations. "We're here to sell, not run a sociology class." One store director in Scottsdale had grumbled in an email. He was replaced within a week. In Los Angeles, a corporate buyer who had routinely excluded independent black and brown designers from the seasonal lineup was reassigned after an audit exposed his discriminatory practices. Julian didn't hesitate. To him, preserving the brand's soul was non-negotiable. He began launching new partnerships with historically black colleges and universities, HBCUs, creating pipeline programs for business students and fashion design majors to intern, learn, and eventually lead within Urban. He established a grant fund specifically for black and indigenous designers to launch capsule collections under the Urban Luxe banner, and he ensured their names were not hidden on hang tags, but printed boldly, proudly front and center. Within months, new limited edition lines dropped featuring designs inspired by Gullah Geechee culture, Afro-Caribbean heritage, and West African textiles, with 15% of profits going directly to cultural preservation nonprofits. These were not performative changes, they were transformative, and they worked. Sales rose sharply, but more importantly, so did trust. Urban Luxe began to attract not just customers, but a movement. Artists, community organizers, educators, and local leaders started hosting events in the stores. Spoken word nights, youth empowerment seminars, fashion for justice panels. What had once been dismissed as just another boutique chain had evolved into something deeper, a brand with a mission that resonated, with leadership that listened. Julian's public image soared, but he stayed grounded. Every week he blocked out time for field hours, walking into stores with no announcement, not to test employees but to connect with them. One afternoon in Philadelphia, he surprised a store associate named Marcus, who had started a grassroots mentorship program for local teens using his Urban Luxe paycheck. Julian was so moved, he funded the program and gave Marcus a new title, Community Culture Consultant, with a raise and a travel stipend to help spread the idea to other stores. Julian understood something few CEOs did. Real leadership wasn't about immediate, was about investment, not just in ideas, but in people. As the one-year anniversary of the Brookhaven incident approached, Urban Lux planned a major relaunch campaign titled From the Ground Up, a short documentary-style commercial filmed across several stores, including Brookhaven, showing the real stories of transformation. Camila was featured heavily, sharing her journey from retail associate to leader, and even Brad, after undergoing weeks of training and personal coaching, appeared in a segment where he apologized and reflected on his growth. "I didn't see it at the time," he said, candid and emotional, "but the way I treated people, it was wrong. And I'm thankful someone held me accountable instead of just canceling me. That moment changed my life." Julian believed in redemption when it was earned, and Brad had shown effort, humility, and responsibility. He wasn't rehired into his old position, but he was offered a role in the new community outreach wing-in opportunity he took with quiet gratitude. On the night of the campaign's premiere, Urban Lux hosted a gala fundraiser in Atlanta attended by celebrities, influencers, and longtime community supporters. But Julian kept the spotlight on others. He stood on stage in a soft, slate-gray jacket stitched with the names of his late grandparents on the cuffs, and looked out over the crowd. "This company bears my name, but it carries your stories," he said. "To every kid who's ever walked into a store and felt invisible, I see you. I was you." Urban Lux will never forget that again. The room erupted in applause, tears. In the eyes of more than a few guests, it was more than a speech, it was a promise, one Julian intended to keep. Months later, Julian returned quietly to the Brookhaven store, alone. No cameras, no press. The layout had changed slightly. More vibrant art, a community bulletin board near the entrance. Local music playing softly, overhead. Camila spotted him instantly and rushed over, hugging him warmly. "Welcome back," she said. "The vibe's different now, huh?" Julian nodded. "Very." He browsed slowly, watching the employees work. A black teen in ripped jeans was offered assistance with a smile. A Latina grandmother was helped by a young stylist who offered to translate size charts for her. A white man in a business suit waited patiently while a trans customer got help selecting a gender-neutral look for prom. It was small, ordinary, beautiful. The culture he dreamed of was no longer a mission statement, it was real. He walked to the center of the store, back to the bomber jacket display, the one that had started it all. He picked it up again, fingers tracing the stitching just like before. A young employee approached him, nervous, respectful. "Hey there," he said. "That one's a favorite. Want me to grab your size?" Julian smiled. "Sure, I think I'll take it this time." The young man disappeared into the back. Julian stood there, jacket in hand, surrounded by everything he'd built, not just shelves or styles, but spirit, not just fashion, but family. And in that moment, he knew. The work was far from over, but it was on the right path, not from the top down, from the ground up.